So in the previous video, we set up a basic Drupal composer build, but we didn't set up, we didn't add any modules to it other than Drupal core, and we didn't do any of the configuration. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to set up the configuration files, and these files live in the site's default settings. And this video is going to be, a lot of it is going to be my take on things. It's going to be how I feel like the setup is easiest to maintain, and I kid you not, there are hundreds of different ways to set up settings files. There's some good practices, there's some weird practices. Some people set them up based on like local versus production or staging, and some people might set up settings files for different services like Redis or Elasticsearch or whatever, and so really, well, my goal here is to take you through the bones of it, and without kind of overthinking what the right way to do it is. I guess it's really what the right way is, what works for you and your team. So the main file, the first file that Drupal is going to be looking for is a file called settings.php. That is actually the only file that Drupal is going to look for. So you have to have that file. We can't get away with not having that file. And if you're looking at a code base, you might see a bunch of different files in that code base, and none of them are they're all named however you want to name them. You just simply include those files based on logic in your settings files in your PHP. So what should go into our file, and where should it go? If we have a look first at let's have a look first at what's in core. So core wants to give you this default settings.php and also this default services.yaml. Okay, and these are very long files with lots of documentation, specifically the settings.php. And it's my kind of opinion that what happens is when people copy this file into their Drupal site, and like this is the same in WordPress and whatever, but they tend to copy this documentation. But are they maintaining this documentation to the upstream? No. 99.9% of the time, they're not kind of going, oh wow, the documentation around this databases section has changed, so I'm going to update this file that I copied 3 years ago and I'm going to change it. So I'm kind of interested in not so much this file. I'm interested in what this file is actually doing, not what's commented out and what all the comments are. And likewise with the services.yaml, which is introduced in Drupal 8. So let's have a look at how much actual code is in the settings files. So here's the default settings.php, and just the lines of code that compile and none of the comments. It's not too much, so I'm going to start my new settings file based on this. So at the top of my file, I'm going to have a comment. I'm going to say the Drupal settings entry point. This is the only file that Drupal looks for. And I'm also going to assume that if someone is willing to read 800 lines of comments in the default settings.php, that they'll read this comment, which tells them where to get the latest version of that file. And something else I'm going to do here is comment out this, oops, wrong one. I'm going to comment out this container YAMLs. That file doesn't exist yet, so I'm just going to comment that out. Now, so that's the entry point Drupal wants, and I've respected the drop, and I'm adding all of the config that Drupal expects to find when it automatically sets this up for us if we install Drupal. So what's really common setting up settings files in Drupal is to split those settings files out in various different ways. And the way that I like to do it is I like to have the defaults that are defined here, and then I like to have everything that's specific to local development in a file, and then I like to have everything that's specific to remote development in another file. So I'm going to start building this out. So firstly, well, this is everything in my local. What's something that I'm going to need for everything? And one of those things that, for whatever reason, isn't active in the default settings is this: what is the config sync directory? So we've got this config sync directory. Let's create the config sync directory. And this is something that's going to be the same on every environment. So I'll just leave it in this settings.php file. So I'm going to go into my root and create a new folder. And I think the name of the folder is a little bit like I've seen it called other things. I've seen config-sync and so forth. I'm going to put all my config in this folder. It's a common place. And so that's that fine. Now, another thing I want to do is set up the ability for a developer to have their own local settings. So I'm going to set this up here. So I'm going to put this at the bottom of my file, local settings. These come last so that they can override anything. I'm also going to check and see if that file exists before I do anything. I'm going to say, does it exist? And I'm going to include it. Because at this point here, depending on what my local development is, let's say we're going to be doing Lando. I want my Lando settings to be here, and I want my Lando settings to pretty much do all of the work that needs to be done for this site to work locally. So I don't want people to have to create a local settings.php file if they don't want to. So we're going to put the Lando settings here. And then later on, we're also going to put in like our hosting settings, and I discussed the fact that we'll set this up for Platform SH. And probably the only issue, not issue, but because I have said in the introduction that I want to also do DDEV support, a lot of the settings for Lando and DDEV are going to be the same. If you're going to be like, I'm going to turn on my twig debugging, or I'm going to turn off caching and stuff like that. So I will also note that I would normally have a Lando file called Lando, but I haven't decided what I'm going to call it here because we're going to have multiple local development environments working on this project. Okay, I've had a little bit of a play with how I want to set up this site at this stage. So here's my settings.php. I am setting my hash salt to NA. I don't care. It will be overridden on Platform SH by its own configuration. What else have I changed here? I'm checking if Lando is enabled. However, I'm also preparing to do other checks here for other local development setups. And at the moment, I'm just then including a local.settings.php. And so this is my default local.settings.php. Does things like turns on twig debugging, doesn't pre-process files, cache, null cache and stuff like that. And, I'll only keep the comments where I think there's something that's quite useful, but a lot of the times it's pretty obvious what's going on, or someone's going to get more information by reading the documentation. And then Platform SH, have not set this up as yet, but I've got the sort of the bones of it set up. So we're checking if we're local, we're running local, and then we're also checking if there's an override.settings.php. So we're not going to add that file. That I've also updated my gitignore so that this this override.settings.php is ignored. So that's preparing for that, and renamed what I would normally call lando.settings.php. I'm calling that local.settings.php. All right, so that is the basic structure I'm going with for my settings files on this project. And in the next video, I should be setting up Lando.